I'm Paul Rees. I'm the director of the National Motor Museum, also the South Australian Maritime Museum, and both museums are part of the History Trust of South Australia. I thought I would go through a few things today. I wanted to just give you a quick history of the museum, and then we'll dive into the collections, our archives and records and library, and then also the future and the future and the visitor experience, and then just one sort of not provocation, but one idea at the end I want to share and see if we can, whether we can get any discussion up on it. So yeah, thank you everyone. I acknowledge that I'm on Paramount country, which is in the Adelaide Hills. If you think of it as a crescent shape that encompasses the Mount Lofty Ranges, starts at Maiponga down south of Adelaide, and sort of goes to the east at Mannum. If you ever come into Adelaide and you come across Mannum, and once you're into Mannum, you're into Paramount country, and it goes up to the sort of Barossa Valley area. That's Paramount country. In 1965, the Motor Museum was founded by local enthusiasts in Birdwood. If you opened what was then called the Birdwood Art and Pioneer Museum, today, you would probably describe it as a museum of curiosities, with a large proportion of motorbikes and some cars, and even a biplane. There was a curious collection. It changed into a motor museum over time. It changed hands in the early 70s, and in the mid 70s, it was going to be closed. And the South Australian government stepped in. The enlightened Premier at the time, Don Dunstan, stepped in and sort of saved the museum, and it became the Birdwood Mill Museum. In 1981, the History Trust of South Australia was formed. The concept of a history trust for South Australia emerged in the 70s when Robert Edwards, then of the Aboriginal Arts Board of the Australia Council, was commissioned by the state government to compile a report outlining a plan for development for the South Australian Museum. Edwards recommended the establishment of a state history centre in Adelaide as a focus for the growing community interest in South Australian history and social history. And this to be run by a statutory authority that could also manage a few other museums like the Old Parliament House, and also the Birdwood Mill Museum, which is now named the National Motor Museum. That in other, just so you, I know I'm talking across most of Australia, the social history movement in the 70s and early 80s sort of did establish a great big interest in social history, but a lot of the remit for social history was embedded in the known museums. So as this report came about, it was about the South Australian Museum, and it recommended a separate entity. So I believe we're the only jurisdiction that has a history trust, which is focused on the social history of South Australia. So for we're celebrating the History Trust is celebrating its 40th year anniversary, and it's been collecting and researching, collecting, preserving, and sharing the state's material culture and stories for that time. If I can, so we've got a couple of videos to show, and this is from the crew at the Motor Museum. I'd like to just talk a bit about our collections, but first off, if I can just show the first video, which is the Holden Heroes.
All right. Hello everyone, welcome to the National Motor Museum. My name's Mick, I'm the senior curator here, and I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about our second latest exhibition, which is called Holden Heroes, a retrospective 1948 to 2017. Anyone who knows their Holden will know that those dates relate to when the first Holden and the last Holden were built. It's a retrospective because it looks back at all of the most significant Holdens that the company produced in that sort of 70 years of glory, and we start right from the start. So they're all on loan from General Motors Australia and New Zealand, as they are now, but basically Holden have retained a significant collection of heritage vehicles. I think the collection number's over 100. They have what they call an A-list, the creme de la creme, their best vehicles, and certainly this is probably one of their I guess, most star pieces. It is the #1 Holden, the first Holden off the line. There's a little bit of a just complicated story about which exactly was the first Holden. This was the one that was unveiled as the first one off the line. Obviously, they didn't build it, 5 seconds before presenting it. That did happen a couple of days beforehand. But this is #1 Holden, the first Holden off the line. It lives here because we've actually had it on loan for quite a while, probably about 4 years, and it's part of a bigger exhibition, which is about Australian manufacturing. The rest of the collection is in its own dedicated space, our Holden Heroes space, which is just behind this building, and I'll take you there right now. And here we are, this is our Holden Heroes exhibition space. A lot of you will have recognised this vehicle, the Holden Effigy. It's a prototype, it was built in 2005. It's probably one of their most well-known, well-regarded prototypes. Quite an impressive bit of machinery, but it sits here nice and pretty amongst a collection that has 18 vehicles in total. And you can just see around me, behind there is a convertible Monaro, which was a prototype, and even behind that is the red VF Holden that was the very last Holden off the line. I'm actually going to show you a quick whip around of all these vehicles because they're quite special, and yeah, I hope you enjoy them, and I hope you get to see them in the flesh one day.
Thank you. That's great. And that's good. Thank you. He did actually make an 8-minute video and we went through the collection, but we thought I'd just start with Mick just showing you a bit of the most recent that we've got in. The collection on display at the museum contains up to at any one time approximately 350 vehicles and thousands of objects. Ephemera, documents, archives, and publications. Significance underpins everything in the collection. Significance refers obviously to the values and meanings that items and collections have for people and communities. Significance helps us unlock the potential of collections, creating opportunities for communities to access and enjoy collections and to understand the history, cultures, and environments of Australia. An assessment of significance guides our curators and our team members in the development of the collection. This is all the way from acquisition, conservation and preservation, interpretation, display and exhibition. As a social history museum, the National Motor Museum tells the stories of Australian history and culture through the lens of motoring. And people's stories are at the forefront. We are a technical museum as well, but primarily it's people's stories up front. What are the challenges facing a museum's collection? There are too many to list. However, two that rise to the top of the pack in my mind, and I think we've already touched on them by listening to the previous speakers, is maintaining a balance between static display and drivable machines. It's a constant battle, and it's something that we struggle with. But with 350 odd vehicles, of course we would struggle with that. But we do have a preservation and conservation program that has the vainglorious ambition of making all the machines drivable to some extent. So a lot of you know the old chestnut Matthew Lombard. He always says to me, everything's drivable, just give me 10 grand and I'll get it going. But we can't just throw around 10 grand every now and then. We want to get something going. So the other challenge, I believe, is already, again, I'm really pleased to hear has been mentioned by the two previous speakers, and that is skills and maintenance of old trades. These are major challenges, I think, facing the National Motor Museum and also most motoring museums or museums of transport, I would imagine, around the world. In my role as the director of the Maritime Museum, we recently sent our senior curator over to the Åland Islands in Scandinavia. And there was a conference of Maritime Museum, an international conference of maritime museums. And it was the topic of the conference was the maintenance, the loss of and the maintenance of skills, and an acknowledgement that in the museum world, we have focused on the objects for, rightly so, we have focused on the objects, but we have taken our eye off the ball of human skills. And I think that's one of the challenges. Raising challenges doesn't mean I'm going to answer them today, of course. archives and records. I wouldn't mind just, if we can now, just play a longer video from the museum curator, National Motor Museum curator Matthew Lombard, as he gives you the people present at the conference a walk through our library.
You're in the George Brooks Library and Learning Centre, which has been created in the old Peerless Roller Mill at the National Motor Museum at Birdwood. The collection consists of around 20,000 magazines, 4,000 general books, and about the same number of manuals and automotive sort of information books that came with cars, as well as we also have maps, all of the sort of things that related to the repair of vehicles. So it's a very broad and general collection. This is the George Brooks Library. This is in fact a photo of George with his beloved Strake Esquire. George was a very interesting gentleman. He was the chief water engineer in South Australia and was the man who was responsible for most of the major pipelines running fresh water around South Australia. He obviously had an interest in old cars or veteran cars, and this particular vehicle is one of his. We like to put it in the library because we like to tell George's story. There's a reason this library is here, and it relates to the fact that George was an automotive historian, an automotive writer, and a sort of automotive journalist, and it's really important that he founded this collection. This collection consists virtually entirely of all of George's reference material, and from that we have grown that collection much wider. George's interests kind of really stopped at the end of the veteran era, but we obviously want to carry that interest forth to the new generations who've got new interests. So the library is run under the Bewley classification system. It relies on a ledger which indicates how the items are to be registered in the collection. It doesn't quite fit with the Dewey Decimal System. However, we found it to be more useful than the Dewey Decimal System. We run a computer catalog system which uses a program called FileMaker Pro. It's not the ideal system, but it does allow us to at least administer the collection. So as a curator, I'm responsible for the day-to-day running of the library. I have a number of volunteers that work with me. Some are specialist volunteers that tend to relate to certain collections, particularly Chrysler or Mitsubishi. Others are more generalist and will relate to basically any vehicles. We also answer a lot of public inquiries. We do a bit of work for various commercial organisations occasionally. They ask for things like photos, etc. So as you can see now, there is a large pile of items. This has all come recently from Mitsubishi Motors Australia when they moved their headquarters from Tonsley Park into the Adelaide airport area. They had a large collection of archives that they wished to pass on to us, which they've done. It includes everything from, as you can see, clay models, film. We're not going to keep it all, we just simply can't. However, we're acting as a clearinghouse and we're appropriating it to the right collecting institutions. And in many cases there are many double ups, which is just typical of an organisation like a car company that just collects items in a haphazard manner. Up here we have our journal collection, journals or magazines. There's approximately 20,000 magazines, I suspect, in this area. We cover motorcycles, vehicles, caravans, motorhomes. We also have here our collection of motorsport pamphlets and programs, as well as car shows and rally programs. So it's a fairly broad and general collection. We try to collect everything that's related to Australia specifically. Overseas magazines we tend to not so much collect, simply because we really need to concentrate on an Australian collection. It's getting very large.
So the George Brooks, I'm going to talk really quickly because I've realised we need a bit of chat time. The George Brooks Library is a project in development for us. While many museums are moving away from holding library collections and providing library services, we are moving We are moving towards improving ours. Over the last few years, with support from the National Library of Australia, undertaken a significance assessment, which resulted in a high score as a collection of national significance. With further support from the National Library of Australia, we then embarked on a conservation assessment, which takes into account the many and varied challenges of a library being contained within a heritage building that over the years has had some care, but without investment is not ideally fit for purpose, but it can be. We are now developing a business case for the library's future. We are engaging a consultant to look into several areas of the functioning of the library, its resource needs, including staffing, and its abilities to become an income generating and at the very least a cost neutral activity for the museum and the History Trust. I just want to now just quickly, if I can, just go on to visitor experiences, because I think that's again another challenge that faces the National Modern Museum and therefore I assume other museums as well. The challenges facing museums is the same as I think it's the same as the post-pandemic challenge that CBDs face. It's quite unclear, but we know that change is coming. However, the NMM the National Modern Museum is in an active and desirable tourism area, the Adelaide Hills. So developing our relationships and connections and seeing ourselves as principally a tourism destination is key to our ongoing survival. The visitor experience is at the core of this, and developing initiatives that expand the value proposition for the customer are constantly on our minds. We're working on developing driving experiences and learn to drive an antique, veteran and vintage experience. Some of our driving experiences will further connect to the tourism experience. I'm using the word experience a lot, but it's important, of the Adelaide Hills, developing partnerships with other tourism providers. We have plans to open up our mechanical workshop and create a kind of goldfish bowl experience when the workshop is operating. And through this, we'll find opportunities to create demonstrations of skills and old trades through the workshop activities. So in a way, some of these sort of visitor experience plans actually solve some of the other challenges that I've already highlighted, which is trades, loss of old trades, and also the maintenance of the vehicles. So having a driver for it, forgive the pun. What are the challenges? Visitors are demanding more of museums. They appreciate a unique visit designed around their wants, their needs and desires. They want memorable experiences, and for museums, such an experience, if they have a memorable experience, they turn from a visitor into a champion. Museums will need to focus on the pre-visit engagement with the customer. And I know people don't like the word customer, but I do. I think it's important. The visit itself is really important, obviously, and I've outlined how we can design experiences and for visitors. And then the post-visit relationship is as important as the pre and as important as the actual live visit. The post-visit relationship is again another opportunity to turn a customer into a champion, and which then stimulates further visits from their circle of influence and also possibly the repeat visit.
Oh, we have 8 minutes left. Just to let you.
Cool. No worries. I'm happy to leave it at there if you want to. I did have one challenge, and I really wanted to sort of talk about an economic and environmental and an economic impact study of the historic movement, but maybe that can come out in chats instead. Yeah. Did
you want to just briefly touch on that while people put their hands up ready for?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Okay. Look, I think it would be wonderful if we had a way of confidently talking about the value of skills and apprenticeships, the value of historic and classic vehicles sector within Australia's wider cultural sector, and the value of the repair, conservation, preservation and restoration industry, and the value of historic motoring events and public activities, including tourism and the impact of club activities. I'm very impressed, and I'm sure others have read it, but the economic and environmental impact of the historic and classic motor industry in the UK which was done by the UK Centre for Economics and Business Research, is a stonkingly good read, published in 2020. It's just the kind of thing I think we need to have in Australia. We need to be able to champion our sector by having the evidence that it's valuable.
It's probably another segue to the Australian context is the fact that the Productivity Commission has released the Right to Repair report, which is primarily focused on current products. So, life over expected, durability and timeframes. But, there's an argument that this sector and this movement are effectively champions of repair. So there's probably another dimension in the Australian context to consider. Louis, you've got your hand up.
It's not so much a question, it's a comment. I'm from the Society of Automotive Historians, and I had the privilege to go through and meet Matt Lombard and his team. But what you should recognize is we awarded the James Bradley award to your museum, specifically the George Brooks Library, ahead of such organizations as the Henry Ford Collection and the Detroit Library. So you have a very significant library, and what impressed me about it was its international coverage. That's all I've got to say. Thank you very much.
Well, I just want to say thank you, Louis. That's absolutely everything true. Good, thank you.
Great, Paul. I might ask a question then, just regarding the pandemic. You did touch on it, and you linked sort of some of the challenges regarding CBDs to cultural institutions and museums. Do you think there are any other things that have occurred through the pandemic that, whether they're positive or negative, on how museums are going to operate in the future at all?
Well, yeah, look, it's an interesting question. I think it's what I linked to was that I think we all know that something's going to change, but God damn it, can we see clearly what that might be? I know that when the last year the Australia Council launched a report that scared the hell out of me, where it said, the prediction from this was initially within the first few months of this pandemic, that 40% of museums will close in the next 5 years. That was their prediction. But I don't know whether that. Obviously there was lots of predictions of the economy completely failing, etc., and things are not panning out the way futurists have sort of predicted. So no crystal ball, and it's not that clear. But I know that that we do. What we're finding is that we are bouncing back quite quickly. At the moment, our visitor numbers are dire. Percentages wise, 52% down at some point, in visitation, but that's because our fabulous colleagues from interstate can't really come and spend some time with us at the moment. And the museum has when in a normal year had 67,000 people coming through the door annually. So 46% of that 67,000 annual attendance was coming from outside of South Australia. Approximately 16% international, and the remainder was obviously outside, states other than South Australia. So it's high reliance on a tourism experience is what we're experiencing. But when the borders open, we boom. So we had a wonderful time a few months ago, but now it's all gone to shit again, if we can swear at the conference. Yeah.
Is the digital aspect sort of, that seems to be the thing that a lot of people are talking about, the digitization of experience?
Yeah, look, I tell you what we did, we were more practical. Rather than, the sort of public engagement in digital aspects, we actually, during lockdown, we buried ourselves in the scanning process that everyone laments we haven't got enough time to do. And so we digitized like crazy, and we operate a cloud-based photographic archive called Cumulus, which has got every basic photograph that's available in the museum's collection and in the library, but they are undescribed. And we spent about 3 months with all of the team members working from their homes, working from home, and describing project. We knocked out about a 3-year project in 3 months because everyone just knuckled down to it. So yes, but that wasn't an engagement or a public aspect. But it will, though the describing of those images better helps us with our business down the track.
We've got Louis also asking another question. Louis, did you have something else that you wanted to ask?
Yes, I put my hand up just before you mentioned this recent digitization program. That is something that the Society of Automotive Historians is trying to get launched, and I really encourage you to continue doing so and keep us posted as to what you're doing, because I think that is a very, very important aspect of the future of libraries. That's all I've got to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Louis.
Louis, yeah, very good point. I mean, I also it's actually just digitization of content is like opening the doors of the museum. It's standard practice. What we find most are doing is going, okay, how do we do the historic record? How do we go back to all the things we didn't do for 50 odd years? So it's a playing of the catch up, and it does feel a bit like painting the Harbour Bridge. Really, you start and then you finish and then you start again. It's an ongoing thing. But yes, the digitization and particularly with the business case we're commissioning for the George Brooks, the digitization of the collection and the availability of the collection through digital formats is very much a point we'll be wanting the business case to focus on. Yeah.
Harriet, did you have something to say as well regarding that?
Yeah, I did. It's about the digital. I think it's absolutely right about digitising the library and the archives and making that available for researchers. But there is the other aspect, which I think will be brought up later on in the afternoon, one of the papers in the afternoon. Not so much digitising we know about, but it's the full array of 3D digital technologies to develop a whole range of experiences online relating to vehicles, driving vehicles, using vehicles, training people in skills. That could all be digitized. It needs money and it needs expertise. Way that is the future for heavily technology-oriented museums.
Yep. I think we're having a lot of trouble sort of hearing that, Harriet, but I think the main point there is the digitisation moving into 3D digitisation. I think a very interesting area that certainly Manka from Deakin University will be talking about later. But Paul, just briefly, did you want to?
Yeah, look, I think I'll just talk about the History Trust itself has pivoted. Let's not use the word pivot. Has changed its recently its sort of mission statements, etc. And just simply by adopting the phrases of we are digital by design, we are a digital first organisation. Therefore, all of our museums have to think that way. Is what has been put forward. So yes, we're seeing that as an important direction that we need to follow.
So, okay, I think we may leave it there for the break. Thank you so much, Paul, for that great presentation.